are back. We are here. And the first thing I have to ask my kind friends out there is to let me know if the volume on the microphone is good, because it got turned off during, or turned all the way down during the move, and I don't remember where it was set. And I can't read the dial on it anyway because of the way the thing's made. So just let me know that you can hear the volume okay. As you can see, I am as you can see, I am sitting in the old office, but as you can also see, it is wall-to-wall boxes. What you can't see is how much higher the boxes were a few days ago, and that they are coming down now. They are slowly retreating, as they should. But it is only going to take another several months. Okay, I can turn the volume up a little bit. There. Is that better? Seems to be. Again, let me know if that's okay. All right, I have now turned it up a little bit. Good to hear. Let me quickly say hello to the folks who checked in so far. And I see, oh God, and they're not going to let me see the comments, are they? I keep forgetting about how irritating and counterproductive and counterintuitive this all is. I see that Wouter has checked in, Christina, Kristen, Iris, Petra, Dirk, Rosalba, Isaac, Chris, Christy Sanders, Nicole, Mark, and Penny. So hello to all of you. Nice to have you with me. What can I say? Life is crazy, but it's slowly getting better. We're dealing at the moment with a what's the word I'm looking for? A post-storm ant invasion. It's always something. It's always something. So we also don't have a refrigerator right now. So we got a little mini refrigerator that was our daughter's. Well, it still is our daughter's because she's living here with us. And so we're cramming everything we can into that. But everything else in the house that gets put down anywhere is drawing ants. And plus, we've had the kitchen hasn't been working for a long time. So poor daughter has been bringing in stuff and things like that, and things get left places, and so every time I turn around I'm like picking something up and finding 17,000 ants all milling around going, where's our dinner? Who took our dinner? And I'm like, that's not your dinner, that's garbage and you shouldn't be here. But anyway, so that's only one of the many exciting issues of having moved back into our old house. However, that said, it is lovely to be here. When I walk outside and hear the owls and the trees, I am a happy man. I love Palo Alto, which is where I grew up, and my parents' house. Although to me it's always felt weird not having them in it because it's their house. And living in it felt strange and in some ways wrong, not morally or anything like that, and not supernaturally, like they were angry at me, not at all. My parents would absolutely be like, glad you're here, as they were in life. But just the fact that it's my parents' house, but my parents are not in it, and that's the whole thing about that house. It's just a house, you know. It's a house we all grew up in, but it's just a house without them in it, and that always seems strange to me because that wasn't what it used to be. Anyway, but now we are back in our house. Johnny has been out romping several times on his hillside behind the house because we have a fairly large property, of which actually we had to cut it down because it was so big that our dogs, starting with the dog that we had, the biggest dog that we had before Johnny, our beagle, really got exhausted trying to police all the boundaries. So we have slowly put up fences to kind of remove, the largest part of the property, because it's a big property, so that, it's more controllable for dogs who consider themselves to be watchdogs. So, but Johnny still has plenty of room to run around, believe me, and he's very happy with that. So, and when the weather gets better, see, look, right here, there's a little buggering ant. Well, you can't see it now. It's run away. Yeah, there it is. Little buggering ant. There's ants everywhere. I've got nothing against ants. I try not to hurt them if I can. I try merely to expunge whatever scent track they're using to come into the house, so that they tend to retreat and then find another way to get in or another something. But I don't particularly like having them climbing all over me every time I put my hand down on a surface. So if you see me, like, during the course of tonight's reading, suddenly going flick, 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 that's why I'm not nuts, or at least that's not a reason to think I'm nuts. That's only the byproduct of having too many ants. So let me see who else has showed up. Chris Fobb has showed up, and Ilva, hello, darling, good to see you, and Hazel, my mother-in-law. Hi, sweetie. We're good. Your wife is happy. My wife, your daughter, is happy. She has a nice ordered oasis for herself in the middle of the house, where she has now an office. The rest of the house is total chaos, but she has made a space for herself. And I say this not in any tone of opprobrium intended, because she worked really hard on this move. She put in a huge amount of work on this move, and so I'm glad she has a clean, relatively uncluttered place to sit down during the day and do her various jobs. So that's good. But at the moment, of course, she is cuddled up in bed with a small Chihuahua, Walter, who it turns out is not so much missing our eldest, who he has been living with for most of the last few years, even though within our home. But now that the two boys have gone off and gotten their apartment, Walter was a little upset at first, but now he's realized there's still warm bodies in the house, and we're sort of vaguely familiar. And we also feed him and take him outside and do all those other things. So he's decided to kind of shelve most of his complaints and just hang out with us and suck the heat out of our bodies whenever possible. He's the tiniest thing. I don't know if most of you ever seen pictures of him, but he's a very long-legged, very skinny Chihuahua. He actually looks more like a min pin. We've never gotten around to having him DNA tested, unlike the big dog. And there's still a bit of a family dispute, running bet as to what his ancestry actually is. But he's very thin, very long-legged, big bat-like ears, longish snout. But he's tiny. He weighs like 4 pounds or something. So, and while I'm giving you news about the move, you may not see either of them, but I am now a cat daddy again. Lily, the cat whom you all saw many times walking through the back of this, is still well. She's still fine and healthy, but she has gone to live with the boys in their apartment. I can't believe I'm talking about this kind of crap. But it's, I'm just keeping you up to date here. So Lily the cat has gone off, but our daughter has 2 cats, PJ and TJ, which is hellishly similar names. But they are now, because our daughter is still staying with us for a while longer, they are resident in the office. And I don't even see them most of the time. They just live in the mountain of boxes. And PJ is calm. TJ just had an operation, so he's kind of skittish. But PJ is doing okay. He's decided I'm all right and probably not actively dangerous most of the time. So he comes out to let me pet him and make scritches with him and stuff. Anyway, so dog's okay. 1 cat now moved to a new residence. 2 cats now resident with me. What else? Boxes, as you can see, and unfortunately most of the stuff that is my stuff is underneath all these other boxes, which were supposed to go to the garage, but somehow during the move it got confused. So I've got like 60 boxes of really heavy books that I do not want to personally lug out to the garage. So I don't know, I may hire somebody to do it. Anything else of interest? Just thinking. No, I mean, I've just gotten back to work again. It took me several days just to find my wires. Here's the main lesson, I guess, that that I can retail to any of you out there, which is that a move, it's like getting married. A move is always more chaotic than you think it's going to be. And no matter how you plan, there are going to be things that are unexpected. So one of the things I realized is like you really need an emergency kit, which we didn't have this time, with things like scissors, duct tape, anything that you might need in the first days after you move in that you absolutely crucially have to have. You need scissors to open boxes and to use in place of a knife. If you can't find your silverware, at least you can cut things up or whatever. Um, so hopefully, if I ever have to move again, which I hope I won't, um, the thing to do is to put aside the absolute necessities, tape, scissors, stuff like that, any medical supplies like bandages or stuff, because you're always nicking yourself on things when you're moving things, that kind of stuff. Any meds and all that, and it all should go into one thing, and you should hand carry it and put it somewhere where you know where it is. As the Amish apparently used to say, "We grow too soon old and too late smart." So, of course, I have finally figured this out after what I hope will be my last move. So I'm just going to share it with you guys. The other thing is you cannot clearly enough label boxes. I learned this one last move, so I did better this time. But a lot of the boxes that are clogging up the office right now were from the previous move and had never been unboxed because they'd just been in the garage. You got to write where they go all over the damn boxes, the sides, the top, because you never know what you may be able to see and what you may not be able to see anything but unless you unpile an entire stack of boxes. And trust me, by the time you've unpiled 3 or 4 big stacks of really heavy boxes full of books, you don't want to do anything anymore. So make it as easy as possible. All right, so that's Tad's household tips for the night. Let me just check in and see. Let me check in and see if anybody has put any. No, and of course I can't read the buggering comments, can I? Christy says it's very quiet. Okay, I'll turn the volume up some more. Oh, that might be from earlier. Yeah, that was from 10 minutes ago. I don't want to turn it up too high. Okay, so that being the state of play, and there's a lot. After going through another move, and as I said, I flippin' hate moving, but after going through the move, there are just tons of like whiny complaint type stories I can tell because as some of you have been checking in with me online. No, we lost power and water for many days altogether. The power was only out for about 2 days. The water was out for about 6. And, and we don't have a kitchen either because the kitchen's being remodeled and it's not done yet. So there are many whiny, complainy stories that I could tell, but I'm not going to because anybody who's moved out there, especially who's moved an entire household, is probably more than aware. And the most they can do is go like, I hear you, man. And those who haven't, these aren't I could give you some tips like I did about having a bag of absolute necessities and never letting it leave your possession during the move and carrying it in with you. That kind of stuff I can tell you, but that other stuff like, when your power goes out and your water goes out, that's first of all, it's like the kind of thing that happens when you're living in the hills anyway. So you have to already know about that, and you probably do if you live in those circumstances. So all of that said, without further ado, I think I'm going to read from the book, from the Witchwood Crown, which we were doing. I will go back. How much of this was there? I will remind you what happened. I'm not going to reread this whole long section of gossip about the Nabani royal house. Suffice it to say, Passivales, the Lord Chancellor, who is acting as temporary hand of the throne, while the King and Queen and Count Aelair are in the north. Passivales is looking at a letter from his envoy in Naban, and it's talking about the growing crisis in Naban between the Duke, who was appointed by Miriam and Simon, the king and queen, and his brother Drusus and Count Dallo in Gadaris, and how Drusus, the Duke's brother, is kind of making political pact with Dallo, who should be his enemy, and is certainly the enemy of the Duke. So anyway, I will skip that part, and I will just start from the bit where we come back to Pasquales, and then I will continue. So that's where we're at, and when if I feel a need to relate anything that has recently happened that you might have forgotten, I will break off and do so. But I think basically most of you probably read the book already once, so you will not need too much summing up to be done. Anyway, so continuing with, after a break of what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? I can't remember. Continuing with the Witchwood Crown. Pasquales didn't bother to reread the rest. The small bits of other business he had asked Froye to undertake for him, most of which concerned the ongoing struggle between Ostenard's two greatest trading powers, the Sindicato Perduine and the upstart Northern Alliance. But none of the rest of Count Froye's news had the import of Drusus's marrying Dallo and Gadarine's niece, which would add a huge complication to an already intricate, dangerous situation that Pasquales had been worrying over for months. Drusus was growing in power too quickly, and Duke Salucera seemed unconcerned, or perhaps was actually helpless, to fight back. To Pasquales it all smelled of disaster. Sometimes it was hard not to wonder whether he had been helping the wrong brother. What could be done? King Simon and Queen Miriamel were still a fortnight away from the Hayhold. Pasquales had heard rumors from merchants, whose ships had recently returned from the south, that conflict between the two rival Nabani houses had grown loud and occasionally violent, with drunken street brawls and a near riot at the Circus of Lorexes after the chariot races. House Ingadaris had long resented the power King John had given to House Benedrivis, and now the Ingadarine supporters, who wore the albatross badge of the house and called themselves Stormbirds, were brawling in public with the Duke's Kingfisher loyalists. "It's like an overturned lantern," he thought. "How quickly do I have to put out this fire before it catches and grows beyond control?" But Naban was also the most populous nation of the High Ward, its leaders historically prideful and stubborn. What could he do to keep the fire from spreading too fast? "I can do nothing," he realized. "Only the king and queen can do what needs to be done, and they are not here." His brooding was interrupted by a knock. The guard announced Brother Eitan, so Pasquales folded the letter and put it into his purse. "Forgive me for bothering you, my lord." "Nonsense, brother. I welcome a distraction. What news?" The young monk seemed uneasy. "Lady Thalia and I have been with the Scytha woman. When she's been able to speak, she says she has been poisoned, and it certainly seems there might be some truth to that. Nearly a month has passed since she was struck down, and still she suffers terrible fevers." "What poison could have effects that would last so long and still not kill?" "I couldn't say, my lord. My experience does not lie that way, and please remember that the patient is unusual." Pasquales smiled despite himself. "That's so, but you still have not told me how she fares at the moment." "She has mostly slept since Lady Thalia began to give her physic. Her rest seems a little more peaceful now, but it is hard to say. She is very weak. Her breathing is so soft it is hard to see her breast lift and fall sometimes." "I will pray for her, as I'm sure you do." Pasquales did his best to disperse the swarm of other worries that had beset him like buzzing flies. "Will you take some wine, brother?" No, thank you, my lord. I'm needed back at St. Sutrin's for Nonamans, and I would not have his Eminence Archbishop Jervis smell it on my breath." "Well, by the bowl of Saint Pelippa, what would he have you drink instead? Nothing but well water? It would be a short, sad, and sickly life for you then, wouldn't it? Etan smiled, but his heart did not seem to be in it. I suppose it would, my lord, but there is something else I wish to talk to you about. It concerns the princess, Dowager Princess Idela, that is. Ah. Pasquale did his best to keep a cheerful expression on his face. Of course, I asked you to help her with those books of her husband's. Did you know the prince, Etan? Prince John Josua? No, Lord Chancellor. I was still at the Abbey of St. Cuthman's in Merriman when he was taken from us. I know the prince was a much-loved young man and a great scholar. There was still something odd in Etan's expression, but Pasquale could not unpuzzle it. Yes, he was a very fine man, brother, but God did not give him a strong body, and he was often sickly. That is one reason I think that he grew so bookish. The volumes he collected could take him to many places that his frail body could not. Pasquale wished he could return to the matter of Froy's letter. And were the volumes worthy of being preserved in the new library? Of course, simply having belonged to the prince would give them value, I think, since the library is being created in his honor. Yes, Lord. Most of them were interesting, but not unusual. However, Etan trailed off. Pasquale could hear it too, the noise of a scuffle just outside the door. His hand dropped to the dagger at his waist, but a moment later he recognized one of the voices, a small but distinctly high-pitched voice. The door popped open, and Princess Lilia spilled into the room, followed closely by a flustered Erkin guardsman, who might as well have been trying to capture an oiled serpent. Pasquale! The child shouted. Lord Pasquale! Have you heard the news? I'm sorry, my lord, the red-faced guard said. I was afraid I might hurt her if I grabbed too hard. Pasquale waved him out, but before the guard could retreat, another face appeared in the door behind the princess. Oh, you wicked child, said Countess Rona. Mirka, love you. You're as quick as a cat. I'm sorry, Lord Pasquale. She simply outran me. Have you heard? said Lilia, jumping up and down in excitement. Have you heard? Grandma and Grandpa are coming. Pasquale tried to make sense of the sudden eruption. Have I heard what? Yes, they are coming soon. A fortnight, perhaps. Lilia stopped, and her eyes grew wide at the importance of her message and at Pasquale's amazing, wonderful ignorance. No! They're here! He turned helplessly to the Countess. What is she talking about? She's telling the truth, actually, Lord Pasquale. The messenger just arrived. They're not here, Lilia, you silly girl, but they are very close. The messenger says they stayed last night at Dalchester, but are already on the road for home today. Dalchester? But they will be here by tomorrow night. Why are they so early? Countess Rona shook her head. The messenger from the king and queen would not say. Not to me, anyway. He's waiting for you down in the post hall. Will you go to him? Of course. Pasquale stood. This is excellent news. Brother Etan, we will continue our conversation some other time, yes? Yes, my lord. The monk looked a bit grim, but Pasquale supposed it was the memory of dealing with the Dowager Princess that made him so. He is a little unhappy with me for using him as a shield against Princess Idela, perhaps. Still, no matter. Etan's discontent, whatever caused it, could wait. The king and queen were returning. Early, yes, but not a moment too soon, as far as Pasquale was concerned. Many things had to be made ready to welcome them home as they deserved. Chapter 26. The Inner Council. The Avril gusts were so strong they made the banners on tower tops jump and snap. A wind so hard you could hang your clothes on it, as old Rachel the Dragon, the mistress of chambermaids during Simon's youth, used to say. Simon even saw a few green and gold pennants whisked from people's hands and thrown up into the sky to race with the clouds. Market Square was filled with cheering people, thousands of them, along with hundreds of merchants busily selling them beer and food, as well as at least a few other folk, Simon felt sure, intent on picking their pockets. All of Urchester, it seemed, had come out to welcome home their queen and their king. "Can you believe it?" he asked his wife. Miriamel was smiling, but it was the smile she wore when her days holding court ran long, when she was worried and tired. "Believe what?" "This!" People in the crowd were actually calling out his name, familiar as old friends. He could never quite make her understand how strange it seemed to him. His wife had been looked at all her life, praised and scorned by folk she had never met. Her clothes and appearance and even her facial expressions discussed by strangers as comfortably as if she were a member of their household. "All right, me. They all came out to see me. A kitchen boy. Because someone else decided I'm a king. So they all said, 'Well, that's all right then. Hooray for King Simon.'" Like Renan, he thought, and the memory of the boy's pale, slack face came back to him as it had for days. The harper hadn't seen someone who had once been a confused, frightened youth like himself. He'd seen only a grown man. He'd only seen the king. And he'd done what his king had told him to do. Now that boy is dead, Simon thought, buried with 24 more men in a field by the side of the Frost March Road. Because he believed. "You hear cheers only for the king?" Miriamel asked him. "I didn't mean it that way, dear one," he told her. "I meant because you're used to this." He looked at the children leaning perilously out of the upper windows as they left Market Square and entered Main Row, took a deep breath, and did his best to stop thinking about the harper. "I'm not. I never will be. What do they see?" "They see the king and the queen. They see us, and they know that things are as they should be, that God is still watching over them." She looked out across the field of faces. "They see that the seasons will come and go as they should, that the rain will fall and the crops will grow. They see that someone is here to protect them from the evil things they fear." "You don't sound as if you believe any of that." "Oh, Simon, what does it matter?" Mary looked at him, but only for a moment, then turned back to the crowds, her queenly smile once more in place. "It's all a pageant, like St. Tunith's Day. We pretend to take care of them, and they pretend to love us." "But they do love us," Simon said. "Don't they?" "As long as the seasons turn and the rain falls and the barley sprouts, yes. Not that you and I have much to do with any of that. And if we go to war and their brothers and sons die, they'll blame us." He looked at her face, her wise, familiar, beloved face. "You're frightened by what happened on the road, aren't you? And that White Hand fellow's message. If you don't remember, quick insert here, if you don't remember, the White Hand fellow's message is the arrow that Jarnulf shot from up on top of the hill when he and the Norn group were surrounded. "Of course I'm frightened, and you should be too. Because you were almost killed, Simon. Because we thought we had pushed those pale-skinned things back into the mountains for good. And now it's going to start all over again. The war with the Norns almost killed us when we were young and strong, and we are neither of those things now." "I was frightened for you as well," he said, not certain what he was defending, but still feeling a need. I heard your voice just before they charged. I didn't know where you were." Mary reached out to touch his hand, but said nothing more for a while. They rode through the widest streets and into St. Sutrin's Square. Here the crowds were making festival in front of the great church. They cheered loudly as the royal procession made its way past. Musicians were playing, and those who had room to dance were dancing. Simon and Miriamele stopped to exchange greetings with Archbishop Jervis and the mayor of Urchester, Thomas Oystercatcher, a fat, shrewd man who made sure everyone saw him bow to the king and queen, but not too low, and be acknowledged in turn. The merchants and city government of Urchester always fiercely protected their independence, even on a day of celebration. After his bows, the mayor straightened and waved his cap to the crowd as though he were the one being celebrated. "Squeezing every last drop out of the teat, Lord Mayor?" the Queen asked him, but quietly, so that only the mayor, the king, and the archbishop heard her. The tall buildings on either side of Main Row now blocked the sun, and the returning royal party rode down a long corridor of shadow, horses' hooves squelching in the mud. The soldiers in front of them had taken off their helmets to show their faces as they waved to the crowds on either side, many of them friends and loved ones who had not seen them since the beginning of winter. "Look at them all," Miriamele said. For a moment Simon thought she was talking about the unhelmeted soldiers, but then realized she meant the cheering residents of Urchester. Main Row had opened up into the wide thoroughfare just before the Narralaw Gate and the entrance to the Hayhold. "Half of them have never known anything else but peace, or you and I as their monarchs." "But surely that is good." His own mood had been sorrowful all day, but his wife's thoughts seemed even darker, grim enough to worry him. "That's what we worked for. To give them peace and help keep them fed. That's good, Miri." "It has been. Perhaps it won't be from now on." He pursed his lips and kept silent. Simon had learned early in his marriage that there were times when he could only make things worse. "She's never forgotten what her father did to these people and this land," he thought. "She's never forgotten her father at all, more's the pity." For a moment he thought of King Elias, back in his brief heyday, riding through this same gate on the way to his coronation, beneath these same wonderful detailed carvings of Prester John's century-old victory over Ardrivas, the last imperator of Naban. The decline of the ancient southern empire had begun long before, but after John's victory, Naban, once the master of the world, had become merely a part of John's own empire, a domain stretching from the islands in the warm southern ocean to the freezing northlands of Rimmersgard. And when John had died at last in great old age, and Miriamele's father, the king's handsome, brave son Elias, had taken the throne in peaceful succession, it had briefly seemed a great empire in truth, an empire of peace and plenty and permanence. But only a scant year later, Urchester became a haunted place, with men and women scuttling like beetles from one place of dubious shelter to another. Houses collapsed under the weight of snow and neglect, and strange shadows walking the empty streets by night. The Hayhold and its proud towers had become something even more frightening, a warren of whispered secrets and heart-rending screams that could not be ignored but were never investigated, as the castle's dwindling population hid behind locked doors after sundown. In the end, Miriamele had been forced to kill her own father. It was to save him as much to stop him, and had quite possibly saved them all, but she never spoke of it, and Simon tried never to mention it. "But it will never be that way again. We won't let it. Miri must know that. Yes, bad things will still happen. That's the lot of mortal man, but Miri and I, we were meant to be happily ever afterward." The king found himself unconvincing. If Irchester was a broil of banners and cheering throngs, the royal company found a slightly more reserved greeting in the castle itself, although the courtiers and servants were clearly delighted to see their monarchs returned. Simon, Miriamel, and the other nobles dismounted in the outer bailey, and most of the troops dispersed from there to the barracks, although the royal guard still surrounded the king and queen. Simon did his best to look pleased and grateful as functionary after functionary came forward to greet the royal couple and welcome them home. The last of them, holding the Hayholt's ceremonial keys, was Lord Chancellor Passavalis himself. He knelt before them and presented the box and its shiny contents, but did not immediately rise. His straw-colored hair still showed no gray, Simon noted with a touch of envy, since Passavalis was only a few years younger. "I fear we have much to discuss," he told them now. "I know your majesties are both weary." "No, you're right, Lord Chancellor," Simon said, and Mary nodded. "There are things you must know immediately as well. In fact, once we eat and take a short rest, the Queen and I will need you in the Great Hall when the clock strikes 2. Count Eolair and Duke Osric and the others of the Inner Council will be wanted as well. Oh, and make sure Prince Morgan is there too, please." "Of course, Majesty." But Passavalis looked ill at ease. "What's wrong, Lord Chancellor?" Mary asked. "Just many things have happened in your absence." He leaned forward and spoke quietly, although the nearest of the courtiers stood some distance away. "We have received what seems to be an envoy from the Scythi. From Jariki and Aditu. We have—" Simon was astonished, and his heart seemed to swell in his chest. This was good news indeed. "Excellent! Where is he? Mary, did you hear?" "I heard." But the Queen was looking at the Lord Chancellor's face and saw there what Simon had not noticed. "But there is more, is there not? You said seems?" Passavalis nodded. "Yes, your Majesty. The envoy is not a he, but a she. And somebody tried to kill her. Whether they succeeded still remains to be seen, but she is in grim condition." So, hang on just a moment before we continue. I just want to check and make sure. Okay, good. Harmony says volume is fine. All righty. Glad to hear it. Okay, so we need that back up, and that back up, and another bit of liquid. Okay, next section. With the return of the royal party, the stables hosted a bustling, noisy throng of horses, grooms, stable boys, muckers, and of course several dozen squires, each watching jealously over his master's or mistress's prize mount. The returning animals blew and nickered loudly as they were led to their stalls, as though greeting all the friends and relatives they had left behind. In other circumstances, especially after a morning's long ride, Morgan would have happily let his own squire Melkin take charge of Cavan. But the gelding had begun to limp during the last part of the journey through Irchester, and Morgan wanted to make sure that he would be looked after properly. He saw one of the older grooms and beckoned him over. "Yes, Highness, and welcome back home, Prince Morgan. Here now, Cavan, settle." Morgan patted the horse's neck. "He's favoring his right foot. I think there might be a small stone under his shoe, but I couldn't find it." "I'll have the farrier see to him directly, Your Highness," the groom said, bowing and taking the reins. "And we've got plenty of good sweet summer grass for him as well. Don't you worry." As Morgan watched the groom lead his palfrey off through the surge of bandy-legged men, scurrying boys, and snorting horses, something struck him on the back of the leg so hard that his knees almost buckled, and a pair of arms snaked around his waist and squeezed. A brief instant of surprised panic vanished at the sound of a familiar voice. I'm so angry at you. You said you would write me letters, and you didn't." He tried to reach back to pry his sister loose, but she was already scrambling around to the front and had begun clutching at his tunic and stamping on his feet as though she meant to climb him like a tree. "Hold, hold," he laughed. "I did write to you." He bent down and picked her up and embraced her. "You're heavier. Have you been sneaking sweetmeats out of the kitchen? Wasn't anyone watching over you?" He held her away, although her vigorous wriggling made it difficult to keep his grip. It was more than a little shocking to see that she looked older, too, her face clearly longer and thinner, even as she stretched it in a grimace. "And you've lost a tooth, Lil? You look like an old beggar woman." She tried to slap his head, but he avoided the blow. "You wrote one letter, Morgan," she said, "and that was so long ago. In Fayever month. I know because I got it just after Candlemanza. Grandma and Grandpa sent me lots of letters in the Royal Post, and Uncle Timo too, but you only sent that one." Lilia stared at him with the fiercest of scowls. Then suddenly she brightened. "Did you know there's a Sither here in the castle? She's nearly dead, but Aunt Tia Leah said she's a real fairy." He had no idea what his sister was talking about and could not help laughing. "I missed you too. I'm sorry I didn't write more." He embraced her and kissed her cheek, but she still struggled. "Now I need something to eat, and badly. Can you help me with that?" "Silly." She gave him a look that contained as much disgust as love, and in that instant Morgan felt himself to be truly home. "You don't need help. Someone will get it for you. You're a prince." "Ah, you're right. I forgot." "Very well, then. I command you to go and find me something so I can break my fast." She shook her head. "That's silly, too. I'm a princess. I don't have to." "Then I suppose I will have to kidnap you and force you to do my bidding." He bent suddenly and grabbed her around the waist, then lifted her up and dumped her over his shoulder. "Captured by a fierce giant. Princess Pigling is surely doomed." She stopped kicking and squealing for a moment. "A giant! I forgot. One of the soldiers told us there was a giant where you were, and the knights all fought with it. Is that true, Morgan? Did you really fight with a giant?" Something like a shadow swept across his thoughts, darkening the moment of happiness into something more complicated. He carefully set her down on the hay-strewn floor. "Nothing to worry about," he told her. "I never saw any giant." "We missed you so. You must be delighted to be home, Your Majesty, back where things can be done properly." Smelling of orris root and ever so slightly of perspiration, because the day had turned warm, Lady Tamar, wife of the Baron of Amesbury, bent and began lacing up Miriamel's corset. A young woman of fragile health, Tamar had not traveled north. "Oh, yes, delighted." But after the comparative freedom of months of travel, of many days' riding for every day spent on the heavy public business of state, Miriamel was in no hurry to return to more formal attire at this inner council meeting. She had never liked wearing a corset at the best of times, but now it felt like being nailed into a coffin. In quick order, the women arranged her jewelry and pinned her heavy headdress into place. Lady Tamar, who had discovered she was with child just when the Royal Progress had set out for Rimmersgard, was now very distinctly rounded. "You are so beautiful, my queen," Tamar said as she viewed the lady's handiwork. "How proud your husband will be." Miriamel only sighed. She felt like a saint's statue being prepared for a feast day. Lady Shulamit leaned in. "By your leave, Majesty, may I paint your face? Forgive me for saying so, but your skin has been much reddened by the sun." "Oh, very well." Miriamel hated this too, but suffered it for high occasions, times when she felt she must look the part of the perfect queen. She wrinkled her nose at the vinegary smell of the whitener, but let the young noblewoman apply it. She could feel it drying her already dry skin when Lady Tamar passed her a mirror. It was difficult to lift the glass to a position where she could see her reflection, with 3 women leaning over her and another one bumping uncomfortably against her shins while she put Miriamel's shoes on. When the Queen finally caught a glimpse of herself smeared white as a phantom, she nearly dropped the mirror. "No," she said. "No, take it off." "What? Take off what, Majesty?" "The face paint. I will not look like this, not today." What had stared back from the mirror was not her own familiar aging features, but something like the hideous apparitions she had seen rushing toward her out of the blackness beside the North Road, the corpse faces of the escaping Norns. "Now, Shulamit, it makes me look like one of the white foxes." The ladies were surprised enough that they barely hid their startled looks, but Lady Shulamit dutifully began to scrub away the lead and vinegar whitener with a damp cloth. Miriamel's hands were shaking so badly that she had to clasp them together in her lap. She knew her ladies must be confused. How could they know what she had seen, what she had felt? Those who had accompanied her to Elvertsala had been in the tents and under guard when the Norns fought their way down the steep hill, whereas Miriamel had been out in the darkness in the crush of men and animals looking for her husband. The ladies had seen nothing but each other's worried faces as they huddled together in the royal tent, waiting for the whole frightening thing to end. But their queen had seen that huge monster crash through the trees toward them, like an ogre from the earliest hours of time, when God's misfit creatures still roamed the land, and men could only hide from them and pray for salvation. The giant had been bad enough, but these women could not even dream of what it had been like as the Norns had swept down in the monster's wake, lying close against their dark horses, their faces appearing out of the night like funeral masks, shrieking and laughing as they plunged through 10 times their number of armed men and vanished into the grasslands beyond the road, leaving behind only the bodies of those who had been unable to get out of their way. "No," Miriamel decided, "I will not go to the council looking like one of those horrid demons." "Go to, scrub it all off," she said. "Better I should be as sun-pinched as any peasant, and I will not wear the black mantle either. Bring me the blue one with the stars, like an evening sky. Yes, we continue to mourn Duke Isgrimner, but today I must wear something different." Her ladies, not entirely understanding the queen's strange mood, hurried to obey. To Mary's surprise, her husband was waiting for her outside the throne room. "Where are the others?" she asked. "Why haven't you gone in?" "Because I wish to go in with my wife, my queen." He smiled, but she could tell he was as troubled as she was. "I went to see that Sitha messenger." "Did she speak to you?" He shook his head. "Thalia has done all she can for her, and she rests peacefully, but she scarcely moves. They say she seems to be slipping farther away each day." "Is there nothing to do for her?" "Yes, or at least I think there might be. We must send her back to her people, Miri. They have healers that know more than even Tiamat or his lady, especially about healing their own folk." Now it was Miriamel's turn to shake her head. "Sweet Elijah, I had hoped we would have a few days to take our rest, to think and talk and take counsel about this attack by the Norns and the message on the arrow. But I should have known better." "Yes, my dear one, you probably should have." She sighed. "Did you see our granddaughter?" "I did, but only for a moment. I swear Lilia has grown a handspan since we left. She scolded me for going straight away to a council meeting. So I've promised to watch her ride her pony later." He crooked his elbow. "Shall we go in, my dear? The others are waiting for us." The great throne room had been cleaned and the banners carefully dusted for the return of the High King and High Queen. but the months away made it seem almost unfamiliar, Miriamel thought. The vast chair of dragon's bones, Prester John's famous throne, sat on the dais at one end of the hall, soaked in sunlight that arrowed down from the high windows, its back shadowed by the lowering, monstrous skull of the dragon Shurakai. The beast had been the centerpiece of a great and momentous lie, its death claimed by King John, when in fact it had been killed by Simon's ancestor Aelstan, the Fisher King. For that and other reasons, Simon had never much liked the object, and for a while had even banished it from the throne room entirely. For a year or more after they had been crowned, the great chair languished in the courtyard outside, exposed to the elements. But though Simon disliked it, the people of Erkenland felt very differently, and eventually he had given in and allowed it to be moved back into a position of honor in the hall. Still, neither he nor his wife would sit in it. Miriamel understood that it meant continuity to the common people, but she hated it for the memory of her father's last mad years. In any case, she reminded herself, we are two, not one. A king and a queen ruling together, even if some of the nobles seem to forget that sometimes. A single throne would not do for us both. And suddenly she felt a flush of gratitude for the man at her left, the kitchen boy she had married. I tried to keep him out of my heart, she thought. The saints know that I tried. I did not wish this life for him. I was raised for this duty that never ends. He should have had something better, but thank God I have him. She gave Simon's arm a squeeze. He could not have guessed what she was thinking, but he squeezed back. The Pellerine table sat at the base of the dais. The long table had been in the castle for centuries, a gift from the Nabani Imperator Polaris to King Tethtain, the Hernistiri conqueror who had briefly added Erkenland to his domains, and who in his last few years of life had even used the Hayholt as one of his royal residences. Seated around it, attended by a number of serving folk, waited over a dozen people in a surprising assortment of shapes and sizes, the greatest gathering of the inner council since Miriamel and Simon had begun to put their own more cautious stamp on the government of Erkenland and the High Ward. To the left of Simon's empty chair sat Count Eolair in his post as Hand of the Throne, so deeply caught up with a pile of correspondence that at first he did not realize the king and queen had entered the throne room. To his right was Passavalis, the Lord Chancellor, carrying his own wooden box full of letters. On the other side, next to Miriamel's chair, pride of place went to Lord Constable Osric, Duke of Falshire and Wentmouth, as well as father of John Joshua's widow, Idela. Miriamel did not much like her son's widow, but she had better feelings about Osric himself, a careful, sensible landowner who had distinguished himself in the Second Thrivings War before his daughter had been born. Ranged on either side of them sat several more friends and court notables. Tiamak, Sir Kenric and his commander, Sir Zachiel, prominent officers of the Erkenguard, and His Eminence, Archbishop Gervas of St. Sutrans, the highest religious authority in Erkenland, a generally benevolent and occasionally useful fellow who also served as the royal almoner. Gathered at the table as well were Lord Farron, Master of Horse and Marshal of the Castle, and Earl Rowson of Glenwick, whom Simon and Miriamel referred to privately as Rowson the Inevitable. Because he was head of one of Erkenland's most powerful families, some of old King John's earliest supporters, Rowson had to be included in even the most intimate gatherings of power, despite being one of the stubbornest and least inquiring people in Urchester. Simon had a slightly more optimistic view of him, which was another of the many reasons Miriamel felt that her husband was as lucky to be married to her as she to him. She was his only defense against his abiding flaw of too much kindness. Simon found it hard to say no even to the scruffiest and laziest ne'er-do-wells. At the far end of the long table, looking even smaller because of the distance, sat Binnabic and Siski, who were receiving curious stares from those who had not traveled north with the royal couple. Beside them sat Tiamak, but his wife was absent, tending the wounded Sitha. Miriamel was also pleased and relieved to see her good friend Countess Rona seated nearby. Both she and Simon valued the Countess's common sense, and the things to be discussed today would require level heads. Also, as Miriamel knew well, the Countess noticed things that many of the male courtiers did not, and often understood currents in the life of the castle that the men did not even know existed. The Queen was much less pleased to see that her grandson was again absent, and hoped her husband had not noticed. He was already angry with Morgan over his many transgressions during their northern travels. Simon gave his wife a significant look, and at first she thought he had guessed what she was thinking, but she realized her misunderstanding a moment later when he turned to Count Eolair. I know your heart is elsewhere, old friend, Simon said quietly, but we need you now. The Queen and I ask you to lead the inner council today. The Lord Steward nodded. Of course, Majesty. Miriamel could not help feeling a pang of sorrow for him. She could guess what it had cost him to refuse Queen Inawin's request for his help. 30 years and more Eolair had served the high throne. A man who refused all titles and rewards. A man who could have, and perhaps should have taken Hernistir's throne for himself after the Storm King's War. Or at least so Miriamel had always thought, and she knew Simon agreed. Surely no man more politic and more useful lived anywhere beneath the high ward. And that is his one true failing, she thought. If Simon is too kind, Eolair is too dutiful. He has never been selfish enough. It had been her idea to have him lead the council meeting. She knew the Count was pained at the thought of having failed Queen Inawin, and Miri had learned from her grandfather and father that the best way to recapture the attention of a useful man was to give him an important task. If only her father had not strayed from the wisdom his own father had taught him. "Hear me all!" announced the royal herald at Miriamel's signal, and stamped his staff on the stone flags, checking the quiet conversations along the table. "His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen, command you to audience." When the room was silent, Simon said, "We thank the good Lord for bringing us safely back to you all. It is good to be in Nurkenland once more. We wish it could be in happier times, but this coming week will be a busy one for all of us. Thursday next, we'll see a memorial manza for Duke Isgrimner, our dear friend." For a moment, the ghost of a smile flitted across his face. "Appropriate, I think. As good an Aidenite as Isgrimner was, he could never lose the habit of swearing by the old gods in moments of upset." A few who had known the Duke laughed, and others nodded. News of Isgrimner's death had arrived with royal dispatches from Elvritshala a fortnight or more earlier, so the king's words came as no surprise. After the memorial service, Friday next will see a meeting of the Great Council, at which there will be much to discuss. Many of you have heard some stories of the attack we suffered as we left Rimmersgard. Events in Naban, as Lord Passavalis has made clear, also call for our attention. And there is the strange matter of the Scythi envoy, too. At this, Sir Kenric and some of the others who had been traveling with the king and queen looked confused. "Please, Majesty," the guard captain asked, "have we had some message from the Scythi people after all these years?" "As I said, we will discuss it in the Great Council," the king said. "Today we have a more pressing matter. Lord Steward, now is your moment." Simon gestured for Eolair. Tell everyone all of what has happened, and together we will try to puzzle out what it means. Understand, though, that you people gathered here are the closest to the throne, our dearest friends and closest allies. Until the Queen and I say otherwise, this news is not to leave this room. And that's where we're going to stop for the evening. Oops. And so, everybody's still on board? Everybody's still on board. Okay, more or less. Okay, looks like we still had it a little bit low, so I'll turn it up a bit for tomorrow. Thank you for your feedback. It's appreciated. As I said, it will take a little while to get everything screwed back into shape, and then I will mark the actually, that's full volume there. Don't want it quite up full. Anyway, I will mark where we finally arrive at. I can always move the mic closer. Try a different mic. We'll see. Anyway, so I have returned. I intend to keep returning in the sense of weekly readings. Now that things have settled down a bit, we have no plans to go anywhere for several months. So hopefully we will get back into a regular rhythm again. In the interim, or meaning not in the interim, at the moment, all I really want to say is thank you very much for joining me again. I've missed you all. I hope you missed me too, or at least the readings, or at least the tales of dogs and cats, whatever floats your boat or finds your lost remote, as Andre 3000 said. And with that, I will say goodnight and thank you. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones and your friends and neighbors. And together we will muddle through this grand experiment called life in the universe. So I thank you. Peace and good night. See you later.